Will Bonnie, would you introduce Helene?
Yes, I will. I'm just so people know, I'm Bonnie Irwin, and I'm a faculty member at the Colorado Center. And before we begin each presentation, I'd like to take a moment to give you a little background so you have some context, and then I'll introduce the speaker. So the first speaker is Dr. Helene Stillman. She earned her Doctor of Psychology at Southern California University for professional studies and certification in psychoanalysis from Philadelphia School of Psychoanalysis. She's one of the long-term members of the CCMPS community. She's been affiliated with the Colorado Center since 1992. And during that time, excuse me, she has taken on many roles. Dr. Stillman has held the positions of interim clinical director, board president, faculty member, supervisor, and training analyst. She has also served as a trustee on the board of the National Association for Psychoanalysis, as president of the president of the New Mexico Psychoanalytic Society, and president of the Southwest Behavioral Health Independent Practice Association. She's in private practice as well. You might get the idea that she loves her work and is heavily involved in psychoanalytic work. She's with us today to talk about Jan Mitteldorf's life, the Colorado Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies, and how they have each affected the study of psychoanalysis. Dr. Stillman, go ahead. You're muted.
Thank you, Bonnie, and I welcome everyone here today. I will begin the story of Jan's life in the only way I know it, a life intertwined with mine. Our life's journey together ended too soon. At the time, I felt it was too short for him. As we go through this day together, you all represent to me the pieces, or should I say fragments, of Jan. We will put these fragments together as we strive to increase our understanding of Jan, of ourselves, and the work we do as healing agents. Jan would be extremely uncomfortable with being the reason you are all here today. He was a humble person and would step aside when being the focus of attention. However, he would be all on board if our presence here today could be viewed from a larger perspective of understanding and appreciation. Many of you heard his lectures on Lacan and the notion of synthon, the thread that holds one together. From my point of view, the thread that was his essence and directed his life and career and joy of the universe was both a search for knowledge and a desire to grow emotionally and intellectually. His fascination with life took him many places, which we will aspire to understand today. As we begin this journey together, I am deeply grateful for your presence here today and willingness to take the plunge to address difficult emotions, particularly grief, that we all share when we lose those we love and care deeply about. Our losses differ among us, not only in the work we do, but also in our life experiences. But our common bond in doing the work of psychoanalysis is the opportunity it gives us to develop deep relationships with our analysts, analysans, supervisors, supervisees, and patients. If we remain in this work long enough, we are all bound to lose deep relationships that will never be replaced. We carry these memories deep inside ourselves, as has been my own experience. My memories evoke a feeling of gratitude for having had the opportunity to know these special people, our analysts, supervisors, and a whole gamut of those that have walked through the doors of our practice. Jan loved his work and patients and had an incredible enthusiasm for psychoanalysis and the training of candidates interested in becoming psychoanalysts, as well as those wishing to become more knowledgeable and skilled as therapists. Jan began showing his gifts early in his life. His relocation to Florence, Italy, at the age of 8 opened many doors for him as he began to assimilate a new culture and language. By this time, he was already bilingual, having grown up with an American mother and German father who wove both languages in their interaction at home. His hunting ground became the city of Florence, where he roamed the streets with a new sense of liberation, unavailable to him living in the States. Coming from an academic family, he was encouraged to explore the world of books and thought. A European education and a gift for languages immersed him in Latin, Italian, French, and from what I could tell, even Greek. By the time he was in latency, he was teaching his parents' friend from France, an educator herself, how to speak Italian. She noted what a wonderful teacher he was and how easy he made learning Italian for her. This was the beginning of his career as a lifelong teacher. By the time he was in his late teens, early 20s, he was teaching art history to college students his own age, who were foreign students from Illinois, enrolled in coursework in Florence. He was considered a highly valued instructor, well respected by his students, and sought out by the college administration for any opening that presented itself for exchange students. During his period of transition from secondary school, prior to the university, he was an editor. Later in life, his skill in writing and editing was sought by students and candidates in the preparation of their own published works. Jan was determined to get an education in psychoanalysis against his formidable parents' objections. He went to the University of Munich, and upon enrolling, he had already read many of the assigned readings in his coursework. It was evident to him that pursuing psychoanalysis upon graduation would require a return to the States, which he considered his home. In order to achieve a graduate education in psychology, he began applying for scholarships. He accepted a Temple University PhD program in clinical psychology, not because he wanted to go to Temple, but because he was guaranteed a full paid scholarship. To his disappointment, the program discouraged private practice and emphasized research. But he was on a mission to get the education he wanted against the tide of changing attitudes in the profession, and became the student in his class to whom peers referred patients for psychotherapy. Fortunately, his clinical supervisor at his internship, Linda Hopkins, understood his desire to be an analyst and recommended that he pursue institute training in psychoanalysis at the Philadelphia School of Psychoanalysis. From an early age, Jan had a strong sense of what he wanted and an unwillingness to follow what others thought he should do or how he should think. At times, he found himself at odds with those in positions of authority, but that did not deter him from his mission. He stood out at PSP as a very competent therapist, leaving his doctorate program and growing a solid practice he carefully nurtured as he prepared his life for another path, the path he wanted to follow. It was at Philadelphia School of Psychoanalysis where our paths crossed. We were drawn to the same supervisor, Stanford Bazilian. We both attended Stan's training group in group psychoanalysis. It was here that our friendship and understanding of one another occurred and grew as we participated in this analytic group situation. During his years building his practice at PSP, Jan was committed to completing his institute requirements and moving to the Southwest once certified. He taught classes at PSP and began using the phone as part of his practice, first as a convenience to patients, and later in preparation for transferring his patients to an ongoing telephone therapy practice. Jan had foresight and an ease in using the phone professionally. Furthermore, he enjoyed using the phone and felt his work with patients using this method was equally as beneficial as seeing patients in the office. Of course, in 1992, this plan of his was novel, and moving an entire practice to the phone was unheard of. But he was confident that he would begin his practice in New Mexico with a full schedule of patients, which he did. I would like to pause here and say that Jan had a way of putting people at ease. Things that would be difficult for patients to say in session became less of an obstacle and more accessible over time due to the relationships he developed with them. His ability to converse in a way that enabled others to feel understood helped nonverbal patients discuss their life story via phone therapy. He stood firmly that psychoanalysis was a cure through words and a visual cure, and that seeing the therapist was not the significant element in therapy. He equated the phone to an umbilical cord that offered the immediacy of being that close to a patient. Jan and I met Miriam Bloom, founder and director of CCMPS, prior to our relocation to New Mexico. It was a marriage made in heaven, as Miriam had begun the Institute approximately 10 to 15 years earlier, with the purpose of bringing psychoanalytic education to all parts of the country, using the phone as the instrument to conduct classes. The chemistry between Jan and Miriam, their beliefs in educating students in modern psychoanalysis, and the focus of promoting psychoanalysis instruction west of the Mississippi was electrifying. They conversed about the differences in educating psychoanalytic students living in the hinterlands of this country, and the necessity of making the psychoanalytic knowledge base available to a wider audience of therapists. It was their belief that psychoanalysis needed to be affordable and easier to access for therapists living anywhere. Discussion around bringing psychoanalytic education to youth educators, preschool instructors, and the developmentally delayed were enthusiastically addressed. There was a generosity of spirit and excitement between the two of them, all of which I was delighted to witness firsthand. While in New Mexico, Jan continued to develop his thinking and expand himself both professionally and otherwise. In fact, he was typically on the forefront of research in the field and began to integrate his knowledge base as he presented at his conferences and in his teaching. Colorado Center for Modern Psychoanalysis became the benefactor of his professional endeavors, and so did I. His research efforts were vast. He was interested in many areas of study outside of psychoanalysis, which he began to tutor himself in through the internet. He embraced full-heartedly the conviction that education should be free for all. He took courses in physics, mathematics, and coding. He became the webmaster and developer of the CCMPS website, which was a project that he took on as a school's clinical director. There was nothing that would stop him from reaching the stars, and of course, that was something he also literally wanted to do. Jan found a way to extend his lectures to the public by making them available on the internet. If you were a listener to his talks, you would experience an articulate, warm, and vibrant voice that resonated with detailed descriptions and examples of what he was referring to. They would make even a lay person understand the complexities of psychoanalytic thinking. Jan's astute understanding of people enabled him to explain a person's essence from a theoretical underpinning that changed from person to person as he applied various theoretical orientations to articulate his subject. He embraced all theoretical positions and believed that no theoretical orientation explained every person. It was natural for him to unite psychoanalytic theory in this manner. I would be in awe when I listened to his beautifully crafted lectures and would comment on the originality of his thinking as he portrayed the minuteness detail in how he understood the patient. He, on the other hand, saw himself as an integrator of theory. He believed that there was no originality in what he had to say because he utilized theories from other sources. But in reality, that really wasn't the case. There was deep originality in how he integrated theory in clinical practice, and that was his gift to psychoanalytic understanding. Such an understanding did not appear in the literature in the succinct and pragmatic way in which he understood the patient. I had mentioned earlier that today each of us brings a fragment of their interconnection with Jan as their analyst, supervisor, colleague, friend, and husband. We will hear transferences, countertransference, and what has been described as the real relationship in psychoanalysis, a term coined by Ralph Greenson and identified by Freud and others to best describing the analytic relationship. Those familiar with modern analysis would refer to the real relationship as object countertransference. Jan's presence as he conveyed his thinking was dynamic and at the same time gentle and piercing in his impact upon the listener. We will get to experience all these facets as we talk of your experience with him and as you explore your own experiences with his loss and the loss of other significant relationships in your lives. Jan and I had our own experiences with losing our analyst. This became a concern that we had just begun to talk about prior to his death. More specifically, being a witness to our analyst's deterioration and going outside the frame of the analytic relationship brought forth our own desires for how we wanted to end our work with our patients. For us, we had a long analysis, and our analytic relationship had matured into a desire to give back for that which we were so grateful. In our case, our analyst did not ask for help, nor had the full understanding of what we chose to do behind the scenes. Because of the unique circumstances of our analyst's life situation, we and our analytic siblings wanted to provide oversight without being intrusive. Life is unpredictable, and who remains to care for us as we age is uncertain, as was the case of our analyst. Jan and I had different ideas on the topic of when we wanted to terminate our practices. Jan wanted to work until the end of his life and expected to live well into his 90s. I was more concerned about unknowingly placing patients into a caretaking mode. If my work continued during old age, our discussion was in process and not fully resolved. This brings me to our institute, which became a major concern for me as I attempted to continue Jan's work in preparing the institute for its next phase of growth. My focus following Jan's death immediately became the students and making plans to transition them during their time of grief and fear about the Institute's future. Immediately, we had to complete the remaining class Jan was teaching. I decided that it was best to approach continuation of his class by helping students to process his death in the remaining coursework. Our board and faculty worked closely to fill in the gaps of Jan's various roles at the Institute. Every patient in his practice was contacted at the time of their planned session and offered a referral. As an institute, we had been in the process of restructuring our faculty and board. Jan's passing accelerated our process. Despite the unknowns, as we carried on without our leader, we continued with scheduled classes. We communicated with students via email and intermittent scheduled community meetings to inform our student body of what we were doing, as well as to hear student input and feedback. All this was happening at the onset of COVID. Since CCMPS inception, we have been an institute utilizing conference calling for classes and community meetings with our students. What was different for all was the fact that Jan was the center force running all aspects of the school. And not to have him at the helm was a gigantic hole in our existence as an institute. What I did as a temporary director of the institute was for the most part not new to me. I had been involved over the past 30 years with all aspects of the school's functioning, from years on the board and faculty to Jan's sounding board, as we moved the institute through many of its changes. With the help of the faculty, board, and Reed, we have situated the institute on solid ground. I was fortunate to have Reed at my side with his willingness and foresight as I prepared him for his duties as a clinical director. With his aid, we have been able to expand the faculty to an enthusiastic group committed to the education of psychoanalysts, thus continuing the spirit in which the Institute has had as its mission, to spread psychoanalysis to those unable to access training in their home base. Before I close, I would be remiss if I had not mentioned Jan's love of classical music and his disappointment that his gifts did not afford him the ability to lead an orchestra. He desired to hear music the way he believed it should be heard, should be conducted. His musical talents, his musical interests involved using headphones to blast his favorite symphonic compositions with chosen conductors. This enhanced his creative process as he coded websites or completed papers throughout his education. He carefully selected high fidelity as the vehicle that enabled him to hear sound that soothed his soul. I leave you today with the message Jan's life inspired in me. Follow your dreams and don't give up, no matter what adversity falls upon you. His life has been a blessing to me. Are there any thoughts, questions, comments?
Yes, this is John Schultz. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I've been out of touch. I took classes in the mid 90s and I've been out of touch for a long time. I didn't even know Jan had passed until I got this email for this conference. Would you be willing to share? I don't know how he died. I was assuming COVID. I don't have a morbid interest in these things, but to me, it's part of the story. And I don't know anything about his passing.
Well, I can say that Jan was in very good health. He was very energetic, and his heart stopped, and that was it. Suddenly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well said. So, thank you, Helene.
Oh, you're welcome, Reed.
Yeah, no, I am. So my original training is in social work, and in particular, my great love is community mental health approach. Not in the in the early days, with Kennedy and Johnson, when they did community mental health. It was often seen as putting mental health clinics in hospitals that were in poor communities. But the kind of community mental health that always interested me, and then I worked in the South Bronx for a while, was community mental health that was on the streets, educating people who were in the neighborhoods, what we called the natural caretakers in the neighborhoods, and we would, and that is one of the things that I loved about the Colorado school. Is the vision of bringing that anybody can come to analytic training, and the possibility that analytic training can happen anywhere, anytime. And as we try and find our, understand our motivations. I had a very specific question about you and Jan and your conversations about ending your practices. Did the subject of analytic wills ever come up? Did you all ever consider preparing in case something happened and you weren't able to say to instruct anyone on what they should do for your patients? Did that ever come up? Was that ever part of your conversations?
It was. I had attended some training, and I thought it was very good to consider that and to prepare. Jan poo-pooed it. He really wasn't interested. He truly believed that he was going to live to 95, and it just didn't cross his desk. At least that's what he verbalized to me. He was just not interested.
Helene, would you mind if I talk for just 3 minutes, maybe?
You can talk for as long as you want to talk.
I didn't plan on saying anything today, but kind of inspired in the moment, so I might as well use it. I just want to talk very briefly about my experience with Jan. In 2009, my best friend at the time was in analysis with Bruce Fink, the Lacanian analyst. And after a year of CBT therapy counseling that I went through for free at the college, the university I was attending, I had taken care of some kind of concrete things in my life that needed to happen to get better. And at the end of that, having made some changes, I was still completely flummoxed with how I had gotten there. How did I end up with these symptoms? And I was still very curious. And I had read an essay by Freud on the universal tendency toward debasement in the sphere of love for a literature assignment, and became very interested in reading the Freud Reader and some clinical introductions by Bruce Fink, because my best friend had given those to me. And I was kind of jealous that my best friend was getting analyzed, and I started to ask for his help to find an analyst. And so I specifically was looking for somebody that was well-versed in Lacan, since that was my primary focus. And I went Googling for different analysts. I briefly contacted Cindy Lindsay, for those of you that know her. And then I found Jan. And there was something about his bio on the CCMPS page and how eclectic he was in his thinking. And just his picture, to be honest with you. My best friend, Christopher Bell, was sitting next to me, and we kind of joked that my friend said, he looks like a good dad. And I was sold. And so I emailed Jan, and I told him about my interest in Freud and Lacan. And I kind of looked at him and all analysts as rock stars. I did not think I was worthy at all to be sitting with you all, especially those first couple summer conferences that I went to 10 years ago. And I kind of was begging in my email, please consider me as somebody to meet with. And in my first phone conversation with him, I called him at the time we agreed on. but he didn't realize that El Paso, Texas was also in mountain time. So he thought I was calling at the wrong time. He thought I was an hour ahead or behind. And I kind of joked with him about being the subject supposed to know. And we were off and running. And Jan, I almost feel like I shouldn't say this, but I do think it's important. He only charged me $50. I had just become a teacher. I had gone from making 12, 13 bucks an hour to making like 32,000 a year because I worked at a charter school that negotiated your salary. And he took me on at $50 a session. And by the following year, I requested to have an additional session. And I started seeing him twice a week at $50. And because of my financial struggles and teaching and also going to graduate school, getting 2 master's degrees, paying for it myself, I went through long periods of time where I couldn't pay him. And there were times where I told him, look, just get rid of some of my sessions. You know, I won't see you as often, or we can take a long break and I'll come back. And as many of you know, he wasn't having that. He kept me in, and thankfully he did, because had it not been for the tremendous analytic work he did with me, I may not be here. Being with him twice a week for 10 years, he was one of 3 people in my entire life that were the sole sources of love and support for me. My Oma, my German grandmother, my wife, and Jan. That's it. Es todo. And so losing him was, you know, gargantuan. Still not over it. It's going to affect me the rest of my life. But thankfully, what I want to end on is that he means so much to me, and the work that he did with me. It's because of that I didn't totally go down in flames. You know, I'm still here and I'm working and I'm trying to finish my psychoanalytic education, and it's for him. It's for him, and to respect the work that he did with me. I would hate to ruin all of that by, you know, just destroying myself. So that's really all I wanted to say about him. I mean, there's of course a ton more, but there's so many people here that I'm sure feel similarly. So thank you for giving me a few minutes to talk about that. And thank you, Helene. You are so fucking awesome. It is not lost on any of us, the work that you've been doing, and just how strong you are. It's incredible. You're an incredible person. I love you.
Thank you. Adam, it really means a lot to me what you said.
So we we do have more. We have a lot of time after when Helene is finished to talk about and to hear from people. And I have a recording from Amy Albert about working with Jan. And I just wanted to, and I think we can move into that. But I wanted to be sure. I wanted to find out if anyone else. The nice thing about having a small group like this, we don't have multiple pages. We have to shift through, so we can see everyone and we can talk together about. We can talk together about what about this issue. So I just want to see if anybody else had any other questions specifically for Helene, and if not, I might ask one more question. But I wanted to, and then Dean, maybe if you're prepared, you might grace us with some words. But any other questions for Helene?
I have a question. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Oh, good.
Yes.
Okay. Helene, please help me understand the Lacanian concept of the symptom.
In it's what pulls. Every person has like a core that holds that person together. It's the central, it's the deepest thread. He refers to it as a thread, and it's that which everything kind of centers around. And so when I think of Jan, and who, if you reduce him, he was all about learning. He loved knowledge. He couldn't get enough knowledge. Really, from morning to evening, till 1:30 in the morning, he was reading something. I don't know if I probably did mention this, but he would read 10 different magazines a day. He was up to date on what was going on around the world. And he also told me that when he was in Italy, it was very common to read 10 different points of view. The communists, to liberals, it was all there. And even the garbage man on the street could converse about politics. So when I refer to his knowledge, his desire to integrate, because he felt that, I believe that he felt that there was a tendency to intellectualize in the field, and to lose that emotional connection that exists between the intellect and the emotions. And so he was one who could bring it together. So basically, that was the core of who he was. Does that pull it together for you?
Speaking of threads and pulling together, let me ask a follow-up question. Are these symptoms that reside within each of us connected to one another?
He didn't talk about that. I mean, you're talking about, in my opinion, Dean, you're talking about more of a spirituality, and going into that area. I tend to take that position, but I can't say about Jan. That's sort of unexplored territory, that never happened between us.
Reed, did you want me just to proceed with some of my reflections?
Yeah, sorry, my everybody got jittery for a second there. Yes, since you stole my question, then I would like to invite you to proceed.
Okay. I wrote down a few of my reflections, and in order to contain myself to 5 minutes, and so if you will indulge me, I'd like to read to you what I wrote. Hello, goodbye. Two words we use in equal measure when greeting and parting from others. Every hello has within it a suggestion of a subsequent goodbye. The goodbye has within it the promise of another hello just up the trail. It's the same in psychotherapy, with one exception. Within our very first hello, we know that there will be a final goodbye at the end of the work. Central to the therapeutic endeavor is the fostering of the patient's independence, which should be celebrated at each step in the process, including the crossing of the threshold back out into the world without us. When we say goodbye, when therapy terminates, so ends the relationship. However, ideally, both we and the patient are prepared for the farewell, having taken time to explore its emotional dimensions and consequences. We can then come in for a smooth landing. This is when everything goes according to plan. But what if the analyst dies in the midst of the work? The very person who would have guided us through our grief has disappeared from view. And what of all the loose ends and unfinished business? Of course, an ordinary termination of therapy has within it a bit of a fiction that we've uncovered and resolved everything. We've done all that needs to be done. That's simply not true. What we might have done is accompany our patient on a fruitful quest to know themselves and be relatively free of historic entanglements, or at least to know when they are repeating old, unproductive patterns and living today as if it were yesterday. That quest and that knowledge continues for the rest of the person's life. Those of us who have been in therapy know that even after it concludes, whether by mutual choice or unilaterally, it goes on. Our therapists who have been intimate witnesses to our lives stay within us, offering continuing counsel and consolation. When I finished my analysis many years ago, Phyllis, my analyst, told me, "I will be with you as long as memory lasts." And indeed she has. I first met Jan about 30 years ago. I was relatively new to New Mexico. He was brand new. Helene followed shortly thereafter. We all became involved with the New Mexico Psychoanalytic Society, of which each of us served as president as time went by. I liked them both immediately, and it seemed that the feelings were mutual. Out of our collegial relationship was born a heartfelt friendship. There were many dinners with an assortment of friends at their home, which always commenced with a warm embrace. Over dinner, prepared with expertise and innovation by Jan and Helene, there was always animated conversation about current events and, of course, psychology and psychotherapy. Most often, Jan would remain silent, listening deeply. When he did speak, we listened. He was a passionate intellectual and a compassionate therapist. As sweet a man as he was, his intense expression of opinion about personality development was quite formidable. He had done his homework, which shaped his thinking into strong conviction. It was the same with music. As often as I tried to introduce him to the film scores and jazz that I love, his hold on classical symphonic music was definitive. We did share common ground there. And I always remember the moment when we discovered that we both had conductor's batons, which we waved privately. Me with some embarrassment, he with pride. When Helene called me a couple of years ago to tell me that Jan had died, I couldn't believe it. In some ways, I still can't. Denial is a useful defense against the harsh edges of this life. I keep thinking I'll see him just up ahead. Perhaps I will. Thanks, Jan.
Thank you, Dean. Sarah, I know you had your hand raised, and I don't know if you want to ask your question or if there's something you'd like to say. And yes, you can still register for this conference.
Where are we? Well, Helene, I was wondering who were his favorite composers?
Oh boy, that's a hard one. He had many, but Beethoven, he really loved Beethoven. Um, I can't, Dean, maybe you know more in terms of his classical interests. Orff was something that we shared together, but I was not a follower of classical music, so I blanked out on that.
I know he really liked Vivaldi, Mahler, and
Oh, he
Wagner.
did. He
Mahler.
Wagner, he really loved.
He said Mahler.
And Mahler, exactly. It was Mahler, Wagner, Beethoven.
Vivaldi.
No, he didn't. Vivaldi was okay.
Oh, okay.
I also wondered, Helene, could you say more about that notion of the aging analyst becoming dependent on patients? That you touched
Yeah,
on?
I happen to witness analysts, and not in a malevolent way, but utilizing their their analyses or to do things for them and to take care of the things that they don't wish to take care of. And I think that was very significant for Jan and I. We felt that we didn't want that to happen in our reign at CCMPS, that we were both very clear about boundaries, and we didn't want to dilute the relation, not dilute, but interfere with the analytic relationship by having other relationships. So anyway, it's very important in an institute training that occur, and also with patients. Patients would love to move in with you, and it's not good for them. And so you have to be able to set limits, and in a kind and humane way. Just like when a patient wants to give you something or wants to put you in their will or whatever, because patients do that.
I'd like to add.
Okay, go ahead.
I just want to express my appreciation about the way that Jan and Helene pulled that off, because it seemed like there was always a really supportive and maturational balance between the warmth and support and presence of you all, combined with the not infringing on my transference object usage of you all. So I think that is a particularly masterful thing that you all pulled off with CCMPS. Very much including the times around Celeste's pool at the party.
Justin, you've got your hand raised.
Yeah, I just had a question. I was wondering about if Jan had any thoughts about the idea of termination.
Oh, termination of patients?
Yeah, what?
I think we both were very similar in. I don't think that. So patients could come in and leave in their analysis, and I think that there were times where you explore that. I mean, you always explore that, and you try to ensure that there's good reason or situations, whatever that arise. But when it came to analytic training and analysis in one's life. I think we both took the position that analysis is never over. And one of the things that happens when you have a good analysis, when it's a mature analysis, is that you're able to go further. Your own struggles, you can address them and work them through. But when it comes to, the door is always open in analysis because you go through many different changes in your life. And we're all not prepared for those changes, and they're big changes. And so the door is always open. And so I think that many people believe that once they've finished their 500 hours of analysis, they're done. And for me, it's only the beginning. And you evolve throughout your life, and it enables you, when you need to do that, to speak to your analyst, it enables you to move further. So Jan and I shared that together.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Helene. Is there, welcome, Miss Dorsey. Nice to see you. Anybody else? This is a time to, I have a brief 8-minute video from Amy Albert to play. I don't know, Tim, I don't know if you can bring that up, but and then if we can hear some more, other people would like to talk more about their experience with Jan.
Reed, am I also allowed to pray?
Yeah, yes.
I caught your slip. It was fun.
All right, I'm going to put that video up.
Thank you.
Hello from Los Angeles. I'm Amy Albert, and I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today. As luck had it, a long-planned vacation coincided with this conference, and I will be in transit for much of the day. Thank you, Helene and Reed, for inviting me to participate on the video to commemorate Jan. That hungry mind, that intellect, equal parts rigorous and freewheeling. That charismatic way of being with, equal parts tacit and powerful. Jan's profound influence on so many of us seems impossible to overstate. I should begin by saying that I come to psychoanalytic training backwards. Analysis came first. I started treatment with Jan 35 years ago, long before I knew I wanted to be a psychoanalyst. I was referred after being told I needed to be in analysis, but I didn't really know what being in analysis even meant. So what happens when the person who believed in you longer than anyone else ever has makes you realize that you should forget you flunked developmental psych in college, almost didn't make it through college, that you could do more than work as a waitress or a secretary, that you had it in you to be an analyst? What happens when he dies? For the first 3 years of treatment, I had no idea what Jan was doing. All that silence, except that I'd never known a therapist who said so little and offered so much. Such an overriding sense of constancy and acceptance. I could never have imagined that this alliance would last more than 3 decades. Jan would become my lodestar, my teacher, my mentor, and my model for the kind of therapist I would try to be. I've sometimes talked of Jan as the teacher who could make Jacques Lacan as straightforward as grilling a burger. But that doesn't get at how devoid of pretense he was. As inclusive as he was discerning, as wide-ranging as he was laser-focused, as emotional as he was rational, as open-minded as he was opinionated, as earthy as he was lofty. Jan could go from the sacred to the profane without missing a beat. A terse interpretation could just as easily be followed by one of those epic joins of his. An Oi Gewalt from Jan? Words. I doubt he intended to, but Jan made me into an analyst before I knew I wanted to become one. I worked for a long time as a journalist during my time with him, and many of the skills I acquired were thanks to the way in which he worked. Eventually, I realized that the thing I loved best about journalism was observing and listening. During my years working in community mental health, a supervisor once asked me to explain to the group how I learned to be listening and be present. It seemed impossible to answer. All I could think of was Jan. Decades with him conferred a singular ability to be with, ineffable and cellular. Decades with him taught me how to sit with wrenching distress in myself and others. From the day I started seeing patients, I carried Jan into the treatment room like a bird on my shoulder. Still do. Don't all of us who learn from him? I still remember that very first session. It felt like jumping out of a plane and hoping to hell the parachute would deploy. It did. Luckily, I got to tell him all about it. But there are so many days when I want to ask Jan about my own analysis. I want to hear from him about the painful stretches when I didn't know what to do with myself. I want to hear how he summoned the infinite compassion and patience that he offered through thick and thin across decades, breakup, job stress, layoffs, career changes, deaths, transcontinental moves, and marriage. And when I'm wrestling with intolerable countertransference with a patient, I ask the same thing that I'm guessing many of us ask. What would Jan do or not do? What would Jan say or not say? I can still hear him asking, why do you have to do something? Jan's trademark combination of intellect, empathy, and vitality was on full force during his last lecture at CCMPS on April 8th, 2020. It was the day before he died. We were 2/3 of the way through the course, Klein, Bion, Kohut. Jan's explanation of Kohut's ideas about structure and support described precisely what he gave so many of us. He joined each of us in our own worlds, blending narcissistic supply, empathy, and restraint. I still wonder how we got the dosing right. We did. He raised me. A day or two after what would turn out to be our last session, Jan texted to follow up on a book he'd recommended, and I'm quoting here, a biography of Masood Khan, a batshit crazy and highly talented analyst. Typical Jan, earthy as a barnyard, precise as a micrometer. Love your description, I wrote. That was the last contact we had. He died the next day. Back in 2015, Jan presented Now We Are Seven, his talk on Yak Pangsep. This lecture conveys ideas I've gone back to so many times and have since passed on to others. The title turned out to be prescient, a nod to the Wordsworth poem about childhood, death, and carrying someone you love with you after they've died. The lecture itself shone a light on Jan's unmatched ability to synthesize, framing Pangsep's body of work as no less than a rethinking of Freud's 2 drives and expanding them to 7. Important stuff, needless to say. Soon after, I asked Jan if he'd thought about writing a book. When he told me no, I was incredulous. Wasn't this a slam dunk? My editor's self took hold. I don't want to write a book, he said. What? Why not?
Yeah.
You already have the structure, 7 chapters for 7 drives, intro, epilogue, and over and out. He said, too much trouble. He had a point. Writing a book is many things, among them a pain in the neck. But your knowledge, I said, it needs to be out there. Who else can present it like this? He paused. I'd rather spend the time teaching and doing therapy. After Jan died, I started writing a book about his death, about the question that, as I understand it, is being asked by this conference. What happens when your analyst dies? But a few months in, I realized I really didn't want to write a book. I wanted to spend the time studying psychoanalysis and doing therapy. The lodestar, the teacher, the mentor, the person who believed in me longer than anyone else and convinced me that I did indeed have it in me to be a psychoanalyst. The person with the ineffable way of conveying that even when I was at my most wretched, it was going to be okay. I'm still trying to make sense of the death of the analyst. I have the feeling I always will be.
Wow. Boy, that was really something, huh? Wow.
You know, it strikes me Helene, what you were saying about Jan's ideas of termination. Oh, let me just interrupt myself to say I really miss Amy. I wish you were able to be here today. The ideas of termination as if there's not going to be a termination. Not that there's not going to be one, but I was really left with this notion, and have been left with this notion, that even that way of thinking about how it can always continue seems to imply that there is a certain amount of internalized object that I know that Jan has become for me, and that Dean, you were saying like you almost expect to catch up with him. I have that same sense, because it's like, yeah, it's not done. We're still learning. Still, I'm still quite young. I have a lot of life ahead, and Jan seems to have a way of continuing to permeate my development of theory and thoughts, and it just seems to have a real way of being a part of, continuing to be a part of my development. That's a neat way of thinking about termination, because it's not really terminating. Excuse me for getting so choked up here.
Can I say something regarding the idea of termination? First, I want to acknowledge I'm feeling honored at being part of this assemblage. I feel like I'm a tale to other therapists that left 8 years ago before Jan. My wife, Dr. Marcia Landau, died in 2014. And she was the creator of the New Mexico Psychoanalytic Society that you've heard people talk about here. So I got to meet Helene and Jan early, attached to that connection. So I'm not I feel like I teach the ideas of psychoanalysis, but I have done very little of it. But I feel well, let me say one more thing about Jan before I say what I had caught my attention, and that has to do with him as a cook. There's been mention of his dinners, and when my wife and I and Helene and Jan would get together at our house or their house, his ability to create meals has the same intensity that you were talking about, his quest for knowledge. So every spice and every flavor, you could see the joy and the creative effort. And of course, this Italian connection, he was very proud of his ability to cook in many cuisines, but Italian, I think he really felt very attached to, and I have wonderful memories of that. I hope Helene does as well. But my initial thing had to do with the word termination, and I think this connection right now, this coming together, is our appreciation of our termination. It's a step, I believe, toward the realization of our coming death. And so we try to talk about it in this third and fourth person style, as if only the sadness of missing someone who dies. But let us remember that it's our own death that we're also not addressing specifically, but is always somewhere in the corners of our mind and our hope to be an object in somebody else's, our patients, our children, our families, our friends, that our memories will continue as a make-believe that we're going to continue. It's a kind of a more ruder realization of memorializing someone. But I think I may be closer to the end than most of the people on the screen. And so I think about it pretty much many times a day, and enjoy the moments that I still have. And this is another wonderful example that I will keep with me for the rest of my few days left. Thank you.
Nice. Really nice.
Bonnie?
I just want to say something that goes along with what was just said. And that's that we are talking, yes, about loss and how that person that we've lost, whether it's mothers, as I lost in the last year, or an analyst, or a patient, that we are also talking about how do we go on. And that can be a difficult job, because it's tempting to go with that loved person. And I want to acknowledge, Helene, your courage in going on. As I watched my sister do a few years ago when she lost her husband, we sat and had a very deep talk about losing her husband because she nursed him through a very long illness. And she said there came a point where she realized she had to decide to live or to die, and she chose to live. And that is sometimes as hard a decision as any we make, to go on without that loved person.
I think it's time that I talk, because I've been sitting here choking back tears since we started. And I remember when Helene called me to tell me that Jan died, I think I screamed, I'm not sure. I just kept saying, no, he can't be gone. He can't have died. I just went into rejection mode. I just couldn't tolerate the idea of that happening. I always thought of Jan as just like full of life and loving life. And anyway, it took me back to my history with Jan. I started to study psychoanalysis after I graduated from and got my PhD in like 87. I took a class by accident in modern psychoanalysis and fell in love. I went to the East Coast, met Phyllis Meadow, who was one of the founders. I went to her house. She agreed to come to California and start a psychoanalytic institute so California could learn modern psychoanalysis. And it was wonderful. I took my dad. My dad was alive. We drove cross country and we drove to see her in the snow. And she came out here and brought some of the analysts from New York. And we started a psychoanalytic institute that lasted 2 years in California. And then there was a divorce. Our analysts were fighting and they couldn't get along. And so my analyst decided to hook up with Mimi Bloom in Colorado to keep our program. And so that's how I got hooked up with CCMPS. I had not graduated or got certified. And I remember the first conference like we're having here in Boulder, Colorado. It was a very big conference. I think there were 50 people there. I met Jan at that one, and Dr. Marshall, Robert Marshall, for those of you who know him, he was the head speaker for that conference. And it definitely was the start of what has made me the person I am proud to say who I am today. Jan was sitting in the audience, and he was very quiet, but you could feel his presence. And every time he opened his mouth, he said something brilliant. And he just lit up the whole room. I mean, so did Dr. Marshall. For those of you who know Dr. Marshall, he's like a mini Hyman Spotnitz. Anyway, that was the beginning of a great experience with me. And then after that, I continued, and I finally took forever to write my final project, get certified, and then I became a member of the faculty. And I used to come to the conferences, and Helene and Jan always picked me up at the airport and were great hosts. And I had many times of talks, and then they came to California, and I think we did at least one conference, didn't we, Helene? Something, I don't know.
Yes.
I remember us drinking margaritas at the ocean, and all of those. There's just so many wonderful memories of Jan. And I would say that, yeah, he was really passionate and opinionated. And I never could figure out why he seemed to have a bit of an allergy toward religion. It's like, and I didn't quite dare bring up the topic for fear he'd bite my head off. But I always wanted to understand what is it that gets you, stirred up at the mere mention of it. And I think it had to do with, and I'm making it up because I never dared to ask him. So Helene, maybe you can confirm or deny this, but I thought it had to do with religion can be not so inclusive of everybody. And so I think he was against any religion that would leave anybody out, whether it be somebody gay or somebody, whatever, who didn't fit the mold of a normal, whatever the society thinks is a normal person. I could be wrong about that, but anyway, I probably said enough. I had to talk because I just was going to cry the whole day if I didn't get to talk. So.
Great.
I'm glad you spoke.
Sorry, go ahead, Vic.
I'd like to say a few words about something that fires off for me. I remember the moment at which I recognized Jan as a libertarian. I kind of had some problems with that. I was like, wait a minute, what about lefty values and all that. Obviously, it was no impediment. There was no contradiction. He just always made it really clear that there was no place for PC in psychotherapy, and that psychotherapy was about talking freely. And if that gets you into conflicts, it gets you into conflicts, and conflicts are part of what is to be verbalized, and it worked out. And queerness, any queerness would be not an issue of any form of queerness would be not an issue of political correctness. It would be an issue of libertarianism and of people including in themselves, in everything that they are, and a community, including in its body, everything that everyone is in it.
Go ahead, Adam.
I told myself I wasn't going to talk that much, and here I am, like always, wanting to say more. It was David's comment that made me think about something. When David mentioned that with Jan's death and anyone's death, that it acts as a reminder of our own mortality. I took that a step further, because I thought for a moment, at least for myself, and I'm hoping that other people will speak to this, maybe with more theory, because I don't plan on including theory. Jan's death for me was very much a death of myself. We can get into why, maybe if other people want to comment on this, but I can tell you, much like in the video that Amy shared with us, I found myself who I really was, who I wanted to be, discovering aspects of self that I never knew was there because of Jan. And so Jan, as a validator and a comfort, in many ways, his death did feel like I had died. Not just something of me. I mean, the whole thing. My symptom, going back to that question at the beginning, became psychoanalysis. Psychoanalysis is the thing that my study of psychoanalysis, my reading, sometimes obsessively, became the thing that pulled me together, that was my anchor, that threaded me together, tied me into a good knot. And losing him meant losing the entire structure of self. I mean, I wasn't in analysis. I distanced myself from the school. And yeah, I guess I just want to leave it there, because otherwise I'll ramble. I going back to David's comment, not only is the death a reminder of our own mortality, but it was felt, at least for me, as a death of self. I mean, I feel like a fucking zombie. I have for the past 2.5 years. I feel like I very much died that day that Justin called me. And much like Kathy, I don't know if Justin remembers this, but I remember the first minute or two of the conversation, and I remember denying it. I didn't believe it. I think I told him no a couple of times, like, no, you're fucking with me. But then once it settled in, yeah, I don't remember anything for at least 3 days, 3, 4, 5 days. I don't remember anything that happened. So I don't know if anyone wants to say anything about that, but I know that we're here today to kind of also try to understand what it means for an analyst to die. And for me, I'm still wrestling with making sense of that I feel like I died. Something of self died as well. I'll just leave it there and see if anyone wants to comment.
I think that Jan, for example, was brilliant at bringing out the best in myself and other people he encountered. I think that's why he was adored and loved and respected and honored. And because there was just something about him that you did feel at ease being with him. You felt like you could be I felt like I could be myself when I was around him. I felt like accepted and respect and all that sort of thing. So I think he had he and other people do it too, but had the ability to draw out the very best and bring out the best in me, which is why I feel so much stronger today than I did when I started.
Sarah? What, you're still muted.
This is Linda. I'm on
Oh,
Sarah's
sorry.
computer.
Sorry, Linda.
It's like there's another Linda Eisenberg here. It's so strange. Anyway, I was remembering that the day Jan died, I didn't believe it. And I called him and I called his home number and couldn't find him. And about what Adam said. And Jan talking about quilting. I feel sort of unquilted. And meetings like this help quilt. Getting together with other people that have had the same experience. And I'm wondering if, I'm sorry I have to leave after this one because there's a family graduation today. But when I started analysis, I would cry when I talked sometimes. So here I am again. And I just wonder what other people think about what Adam said and what I'm saying. It's really bringing up a lot of grief. So thank you, Adam, for addressing that. What do you think, Colleen, about requilting when you're unquilted?
I suppose I'm thinking about the dying part, because I think that is so there, the desire not to go on. Those days when you're just really in a fog and you're just functioning. And I think for you, Linda, I think that at the moment, you feel, and maybe this being presumptuous, I think for the moment you might feel unquilted because you're grieving. And I think when you grieve, you do feel unquilted. And then something strange happens. You kind of pull it together, and then this is just from my own experience. And then you just move over. You get through that terrible, terrible, painful moment, or however it lasts, and then something happens, and you just move on. And so I right now at this moment, I feel like you're into it. You have the opportunity to grieve with others, and I think that is so healing. And more of that is so necessary. It's not just one time, it's over and over and over again.
Yeah, I have some fear of, there's some people here that are dear to me that I don't want to lose connection with. like, so even Celeste at her parties, like, where is she? We've already lost people, it feels like.
Esther, do you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, as I'm listening here, I haven't been involved with CCMPS long, but long enough for a substantial impact. And I thought it might be interesting here for those of you who didn't read it to read my log in Canvas following Jan's last class the day before his death. Following class number 11, 4/8/20, just tooling along. Yes, interesting. I'm going to listen to this again. It's great to be heard. I like Beyond's proto-thoughts. Maybe these proto-thoughts are linkages that gain more substance with words and sentences and paragraphs that I produced with cutting and pasting and are strengthened through validation by the good enough mother other. And Kohut, the structure of the self is developed when it meets a boundary, a reflective boundary, a containing boundary. Yes, this makes sense with my ideas. Limits that are strong enough to contain, but flexible enough to be stretched with growth. Yes, good. What? Did you say arc? Everyone born with an arc? A life story that needs to be lived and expressed? Mozart, what? You know what this sounds like? God has a plan for your life, this purpose-driven life. Find your purpose, build your ark and float away in it. And if I miss the boat, I'm doomed to misery. I'm hell-bent. Predestination? The big other is real? I want off this ark. I would rather swim. PS time. I sure hope I am missing something here. I feel like Grover trapped in the story. There's a monster at the end of this book. I want to build brick walls, tie rope knots. I can't run away. The end is coming closer. Am I just going to find out that it is just me and my imagination, leaving me to melt away in embarrassment? Or will I be squashed by the monstrous curving arc that will keep rising up? The curve that judges and kills. Oh, for a real arc. But I only see in my imagination a lifeline of acceptance, self-restraint, tied to nothing, and no containing mother other.
Thank you, Esther.
Thank you, Esther. Dr. Lynn?
I wanted to address both Adam and Linda and to amplify what Helene had to say about grieving in the presence of others is what requilts us. And what popped into my head was, that's why Shiva happens every year. Mm-hmm. For those of you who are not familiar, the commandment is that you will go to temple and grieve the loss of each of your parents on the day that they died for as long as you live. And you don't do it alone. You must collect a minyan, a group of like people who will do you the favor of taking that day from their life and giving it to your life so you can grieve with friends near. So this conference is one stop in a lifetime of grieving, which hopefully we can do in the presence of loving others.
Thank you.
Lynn, can I say something about that? Over 2 years later, I'm able to come here and be with you all, and I do feel like I'm benefiting, because seeing the pain that I felt in all of these other people only validates just how powerful Jan was, that it wasn't my imagination, that he really was that powerful a figure. But I will be honest with you, and I don't know how many people experience this, at least in the first few months, if not first year after his death, I couldn't stand to share that with anyone, because I think analysis is so very personal and intimate. And I'm curious how many other people, those classes that we had, and thank you, Kathy, for helping us with those classes to finish out the semester. I couldn't stand being there, because at least when it was that fresh, Jan was something that I had lost, and I didn't want to share that with anyone. It was such a special, intimate thing for me. And I almost didn't want to even hear what other people thought about him, for fear that it would taint my own perception of him. And so with time, yes, I feel like grieving with all of you all is helping me today. I've even smiled a couple of times hearing Amy, hearing Helene. But I don't even know what that's about, really. But I do recall initially feeling like I wanted to be alone, because I couldn't stand to share Jan with anyone else. Since we're talking about what we all go through, maybe that's an important topic. It's embarrassing for me to admit that. It feels so selfish.
I wonder if that's similar to how, a sibling, older sibling feels when a younger one is born. And just because so much of the sense of self is tied up into the parents' attention and gaze, and the feeling that gets dissipated and fragmented if it's not all there, it's spread around. I wanted to say something quick about just also just some things that various comments are making me think about. And I didn't know about Jan's desire or wish to conduct orchestras, and hearing about the way that he was in the kitchen with food, and that those speak so much to how his gift was integration. I've been thinking about like wondering how to put into words what his contribution to modern psychoanalysis was. Thought about that a lot. And it's really, and I asked him about writing when I was in analysis with him for 6 years, and talked about writing down his thoughts or his teachings. And he told me that he wasn't interested in that, but I really wanted there to be something concrete that I could go to get questions answered the way that I could go to him. And in analysis and in my, when I would bring my own issues or problems to him, or bring cases with my patients, the way he would frame and integrate different theories was not eclectic. It wasn't just mishmash. It was just masterful. It was, I'd talk about a question, he'd ask a few questions here and there, and then he'd start to talk about it, and it would be sort of vague and diffused, and then just before too long, it would be like pulling things in, and then just boom, he would just nail it, like what was going on, what was the thing that I was trying to get at, whether it was myself or somebody else that I was talking about. And that, you know, that reminds me of the music, the blending of the instruments and the blending of the spices and the flavors. Like that's what he did. And it was not just putting pieces together into something. It was like making something new or making something real out of it. Or finding what was underneath everything, all these different aspects and ways of looking at things.
Watching the clock, Dean, I'd love to hear from you. And then with your permission, maybe we'll take just a 5-minute break to get a glass of water or something, and then come back and do one more, here, just a few more things before lunch.
Great. I'm gonna just put it on mute.
Whenever you're ready, Dean.
Unmute yourself.
Thank you. When we began this morning, Helene spoke of fragments that each of us may bring today, fragments of memory. And during our reflections on Jan, we've spoken of his capacity, extraordinary capacity to gather together ideas and integrate them. And lately we've been talking about a quilt. So I think I have an answer for the question posed by the title of this gathering. What follows the death of the analyst? A quilting bee. That's what's happening, I think, today. When I think of quilts, I think of comfort. And as each person brings today their reminiscences and even anticipations, it's as if we're putting these pieces together and extending the quilt. But I also understand that when we grieve, we weep. And it's difficult to see the quilt when tears fill our eyes. But it is still there. We can still feel it. I'm feeling it today, and I hope all of you are as well.
Thank you, Dean. So if we could take a 5-minute break, and we'll have and then have one more presentation before lunch. So see you at 50 minutes after the hour, wherever you're at.
I want to say goodbye to everybody and thank you so much. I look forward to hearing the rest on the video, but I'm very grateful. And
Bye, Linda and Sarah.
Bye, Linda.
Bye, Linda.
Thank you so
Here.
much, Whitney.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Who's presenting next?
I am.
Looking forward to it.
I'm hoping to give you a little theory.
Reed, I didn't know until yesterday that you spoke Japanese. That's awesome.
Yeah. One of my other lives.
I have an analyst friend who speaks Japanese. I gotta get him together.
Oh, yeah.
I think a little theory is just what the doctor ordered here, Reed. Thanks.
Well, we'll see how well I do.
I want all the intellectualization so I can emotionally distantiate myself.
Okay. Let's see. Do our best. Dr. Papavasiliou?
Yes.
Are you there? Okay.
Oh, I'm here. Can you see me?
I can see you. Yeah.
Okay.
Are we ready?
I'm here at least in in emails. I don't know where I am otherwise, but I'm here.
Sure. Okay. Well, so we have one more one more presentation, then we'll have a break for lunch, and then this afternoon we'll have. And can everybody hear me? All right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And then this afternoon we'll have two presentations. So we'll have 4 presentations, 2 by students and 2 by faculty. So I'm going to talk for a bit, and then hopefully Dr. Papavasiliou, I will say something worth responding to, and then of course we'd love to hear from everybody.
Are you going to let me introduce you, Reed?
Oh, okay. Thank you, Bonnie.
You're
I'm glad
welcome.
somebody's-
Clearly, we know who's going to speak next, but it would be nice for you to know a little of his history. He's been in clinical social work for 25 years, and he mentioned this morning with an emphasis on community mental health. He's been in psychoanalytic training since 2004, and he's nearing his completion of his doctoral studies at the Boston Graduate School for Psychoanalysis, which means he's writing the big paper. He comes to us from New Mexico, where he has a private practice in Santa Fe. And when he's not writing or doing clinical work, he grows vegetables with his wife and daughters and manages a flock of chickens and a herd of goats. He's the current director of CCMPS, and he's here today to talk about the loss of a leader and strategies for continuing after that loss. And then, as he just intimated, Yannis Papavasiliou will be following him. He is also a graduate of the Boston Graduate School of Psychoanalysis and the Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies. He's a faculty member at the Colorado Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies, a clinical supervisor, and a psychoanalyst practicing independently in New York City. Dr. Papavasiliou has worked for over 30 years as a clinician in a variety of settings with diverse populations. Currently, he works with individuals and couples, and he really enjoys continuing to study psychoanalytic theories from different schools of thought, and this informs his practice. He's an active member of Psychoanalysts Against Racism Committee at CMPS and a participating member at the Study Group on Race and Psychoanalysis at the William White Institute. Dr. Papavasiliou has served as a fellow at the referral service at CMPS, and he will be responding to Mr. Larson's presentation. Take it away, Reed.
Thank you. All right. So before I really start, I'd like to thank the students and the faculty and the staff and the board, the members of the board of the Colorado Center for Modern Psychoanalytic Studies, for their courage in approaching this topic. When an institute experiences a tragedy, it can be difficult to think about the future and about the wider world. In times of loss, one wants to turn inward and focus solely on survival. And I would like to thank, in that same vein, in particular, Claudia Heilbrunn. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. I'm so happy that you were able to come, for her book, What Happens When the Analyst Dies? Unexpected Terminations in Psychoanalysis. Each one of those essays in her book gave us courage as we thought about approaching this topic. And second, I guess this is second, I'd like to start with a poem by my friend Jay Leeming. I haven't seen him in a long time. He's from Minnesota. I hope he's still well. And a friend of mine told me that poems should always be read twice. So you're going to hear this poem twice. Once here at the beginning and then once at the end. And this is from Jay's really excellent book of poems called Dynamite on a China Plate. It's entitled The Barber. The barber is someone who creates by taking away. like a writer who only owns an eraser. He is like a construction company that begins with a large office building and ends up with a small wooden house. On the wall is his license, showing that he's been to school and learned of all of the varieties of loss. For this reason, a haircut can make me nervous. Sometimes I close my eyes and I hear only the snip of the scissors. Their two gleaming halves talking of the balance that is here, the partnership between this man in a blue smock and the hairs, faithful as rain, that even before birth and after death flow tirelessly out of the head toward the comb and the blade. Yeah. Freud, in Totem and Taboo, Freud postulates an equation between the psychological development of so-called primitive peoples, savages, and neurotics. He uses this equivalence to resolve a paradox. Although one might expect that primitive and savage societies would have fittingly primitive and savage sexual ethics, i.e. none, one finds upon examination that these societies, quote, set before themselves with the most scrupulous care and the most painful severity the avoidance of incestuous relations. Indeed, their whole social organization seems to serve that purpose, or to have been brought into relation with its attainment. There are a lot of problems with how Freud writes in Totem and Taboo. It was written 100 years ago. It's very hard to tolerate his use of words like primitive and savage, and even his ideas of progress, of civilizations. He seems to have little or no understanding of rural livestock raising people of every culture, whose survival is intimately related to tracking the genealogies of their animals. This aspect of Totem and Taboo is easy enough to critique, and it should be critiqued. But today, just for an hour, rather than getting waylaid by Freud's use of now anachronistic words, I would like to try, with your permission, to understand whether he is saying anything useful to us about our current situation. Whether he is saying something fundamental about all of us as human beings, alive 100 years later, thinking about what happens when an institute loses a leader and when a patient loses an analyst. A totem is defined as a natural object or animal or person believed to have spiritual or symbolic significance. That is something for fear of immediate harm from that supernatural force, as well as a condition of being both sacred and dangerously dirty. Something which is taboo is set apart from common activity and is thus prohibited to most individuals in a society without their knowing why. Special individuals such as kings, priests, and criminals are the subject of taboos and thus are attributed a dangerous and contagious power for good and for ill. Too close contact with such a powerful figure can be dangerous for an ordinary person. Within any particular tribe, there may be multiple clans. Each clan is described by their totem, whether it be an animal, a plant, a force of nature. The totem is first of all the tribal's ancestor, the ancestor of the clan, its spirit and its protector. In order to maintain social order in the tribe and the clan's relations to the natural world, each clan member has an obligation to the totem to maintain the totem's taboos. Equally, the totem has an obligation to the clan to protect it from harm and to help it prosper. The anthropologists that Freud quotes in Totem and Taboo don't say this, but just to let you know, totems also have rules and taboos that they must adhere to. Freud has taught that a child's earliest choice of objects for their love are incestuous, that it is natural to turn to those closest to them and that those objects are forbidden. Mother, sister, father, brother. Furthermore, Freud says that as the child grows up, they liberate themselves from this incestuous attraction and choose a mate other than a family member. The importance of a child's incestuous longings towards his parents are demonstrated by, quote, savage peoples' reaction to them as immediate perils, against which the most severe measures of defense must be enforced. Hence, there is a taboo against marrying within the Totem clan. Breaking this taboo imperils the agreement that exists between the clan and their totem, i.e., to take care of one another. The danger to the totem and therefore to the clan of breaking this taboo is so serious that in some of the tribes studied, the regular penalty for violating it was death. Freud says the primeval prohibition, the taboo, forcibly imposed from the outside and directed against the most powerful longings to which human beings are subjected, the incestuous longing for family members, persists in the unconscious. And those who break the taboo may be killed. However, those who obey the taboo develop an ambivalent attitude toward what the taboo prohibits. And Freud attributes the magical power of the taboo to its capacity for arousing temptation. Importantly, he further notes that in many of these societies, violations of taboos can be atoned for. They can be repaired by giving something up, by renunciation. Renunciation lies at the basis of the obedience to a taboo, just like the resolution of the Oedipal complex. Totemism is, in essence, a covenant with the father, exchanging the father's protection through the totem, whether animal, plant, or natural force, with their promise not to act on the incestuous impulse. Over 100 years ago, Freud outlined the initial arrangements required of psychoanalytic treatment. Among those arrangements was an implied agreement between the analyst and the patient to quote, stay together forever. Freud, Eichhorn, Reich, Winnicott, and many others outlined for us the elements of the analytic frame. They give us the length and frequency of sessions, the fee, instructions to the patient to use the couch, to say whatever comes to mind, and to tell the truth, whatever that is. But they never talk about endings. The good enough setting is essential for allowing a patient the possibility for regression, and then the reworking of the fixation points in their history. The same door, the same couch, the same desk, the same books, lamps, the same time, the same person, quote, alive and listening, preoccupied with them, the patient, at each session. And that keeps the door open for the patient to regress and to transfer on to the analyst the figures of their past. Andre Green said that the analytic setting with its frame is the framework of the organized ego on whose immobilization through consistency, the formation, existence, and discrimination of the child's ego and the object depends. The frame's unchanging nature allows for the gradual process of differentiation. But does he say what happens when the frame, the one maintaining the frame, is no longer there? The analyst's fundamental task in the early days of treatment is the instruction to the patient about and the maintenance of the frame. To study with the patient the myriad ways the frame may be broken and to work through the patient's ambivalence about it. By guarding the analytic frame, the analyst guards and takes care of the patient, allowing them to do their work in safety, to work through their repetitions with the analyst in the present, relying on the fundamental timelessness of the unconscious. Winnicott said that for his patients, the couch and the pillows were not just symbols of the mother. For the patient, they were the mother. One of the patient's first jobs in treatment is to learn the rules of the analytic frame, to come on time, to pay on time, to talk, and to tell the truth. But the analyst must also learn how to maintain the analytic frame, to be on time, to keep the office clean, warm, free of distraction, to have a comfortable couch or a chair, and to be for that hour alive and listening and preoccupied with the patient. Is there anywhere in this timelessness facilitated by the analytic frame for either the patient or the analyst to think about what happens when the analyst is no longer there? It is also both of their responsibilities to manage their ambivalence about it. The frame provides safety for the patient and the analyst to do their work, but it also does not allow them to do just whatever they want. Analysts are as ambivalent about the frame as patients. We would also like to do whatever we want whenever we want, but satisfying our narcissistic needs is dangerous to our patients and to ourselves. Renouncing our own narcissistic needs is essential to the creation and the maintenance of the analytic frame. When that can be done, and we have to do it every day over and over again with our patients and with ourselves, the psychic energy bound in the renunciation of gratification can be used by the psyche for other tasks. Frustration tolerance is one of the skills we want to teach both patients and analysts. Breaking the analytic frame is one of the taboos of our work, and the study of the myriad ways in which these taboos are challenged and maintained is one of the ways that both patient and analyst come to understand their unconscious motivations. However, as the treatment progresses and both patient and analyst get better, that is more tolerant of the boundaries imposed by the frame fades into the background. In his excellent study in 1967 of the analytic situation, Blager writes that there are always two environments in the analyst's office, the one the analyst maintains and the one the patient brings. He also observes that as the office, the couch, and the books fades into the background, it becomes unanalyzable. It starts to function as a depository for disavowed psychic elements of the patient and the analyst mind. I think that this is where our difficulty with endings and thinking about our own ending lies. We do the work for so long, we expend so much energy in it, nurture so many ideas of what we would like to do or to teach, that the frame of our lives fades into the background. My sister and I recently went to a neurology appointment with my father, who was a brilliant scientist and researcher, a medical doctor, who is now 85 and struggling with the symptoms of dementia. In the midst of that meeting, the neurologist turned to my sister and I and asked, now that we are both over 50, whether we had all our healthcare proxies and instructions and plans written out and in place. And neither of us did, even though we both have children. We had not put together instructions about what we would like if or when we can no longer take care of ourselves or take care of them. Without something written down, we have no say in what happens to us or our children. We are passing along the problem of thinking about what to do with us to them. An analytic institute also has boundaries it must maintain. Similar frames and agreements exist in an institute among the board, the administration, the students, the faculty, and the larger mental health community. The institute, in the form of its administration, staff, faculty, and board, should actively maintain a clear and consistent frame in which it is possible for the students to learn and progress, in which the faculty can teach, and hopefully at least for the duration of the class, there can be a timeless quality where the students and teachers are free to be preoccupied with themselves, each other, and the task of learning. Among the obligations of the Institute on behalf of the clan, and on behalf of the tribe, if we can use Freud's terminology, is to offer regular, consistent training, supervision, qualified instructors, a clear path to certification for those who wish to pursue it, maintenance of good relations with other institutes, and keeping up to date with the developments in the field. Among the students' agreements with the Institute are to attend classes, to submit assignments, keep payment agreements, and participate with administration and faculty in an ongoing evaluation of the program. The board's obligation is to maintain the long-term vision of the school and to be sure it is financially viable, among other essential contributions. Of these containers, they hold the largest one. Each level of the learning institution has a role to play, and each will at some point encounter a boundary, a limit on what they are doing. Understanding and working through ambivalence about those boundaries is ongoing and essential. So it's important that the boundaries fulfill their purpose and make sense. Inconsistent or senseless rules or arbitrary enforcement of them creates tension and destroys the feeling of safety. It is often the role of the day-to-day leader of the Institute to guard those boundaries and to attend to the daily maintenance of the frame. As such, the leader of an institute often becomes its face, the father with whom unresolved Oedipal issues can be worked through, if the boundaries are being maintained. There is such a thing, as we all well know, as a bad father. Of course, the father does not need to be one person. It can be the faculty, the administration, or whoever's in charge of holding that particular frame. The question we're trying to think about today is what happens when the holder of the frame, whether it's the analyst or the leader of a small institute, dies. Almost 20 years ago, I was the member of a psychoanalytic institute that closed following the death of the leader. It was just one branch of a larger school, so those of us who were students were able to continue our training, but it was an extremely difficult experience. Compounded by the fact that to continue my education, I had to travel back to my hometown, where the main branch of the school was located, and could, if I wanted to, sleep in my childhood bedroom every other weekend while I was in class. What's important for us in this is that for many years, I blamed myself. I wondered if I had done enough to save the school. Was the closing of the school my fault? Had I broken a taboo? And I think that I'm not the only student there who had that thought. 11 years ago, I moved from Massachusetts to New Mexico. In the study that I'm finishing up about the effect of that move on 3 patients, each one reacted to my move, the announcement of my move as a notice of ending. They all felt abandoned. They all had the idea that I no longer wanted to work with them, and 2 thought that I had set them up. Although teletherapy has been widely practiced for 30 years, the emotional impact of my breaking the frame by moving myself across the country injected an unwanted, quote, sliver of reality into their treatment, to quote Andre Green. I had inserted time into the timelessness of their treatment, and my choice to move to the West had nothing to do with them. I did not renounce my desire to live on the other side of the country, but I went ahead and did it. As time passed, each of these 3 patients managed my move consistent with their own history and character, as one might expect. One was able to express his anger directly to me about my decision. Another, who was committed to having nothing change in his life, stayed with me on the phone for a year and then dropped out because he couldn't be bothered to keep up with the phone calls. The last subject of my study just ignored my move once he realized that we could continue to talk by phone. And 11 years later, he's still in treatment. Having said that, all 3 at some point began to wonder whether they had driven me away, if it was their fault. Did I leave for my own reasons or because of something they did? The commonality of this reaction made me wonder which one they would have preferred. When the analyst or the leader of the school dies, he is gone, not just leaving town. The breaking of the frame on that level, on the level of reality, cannot be repaired, but must be processed with someone other than the one who died. The patient, the student, is left alone. How do they know if the analyst died or if they killed him? They have to work it out for themselves. But this is something that happens all the time. Analysts, therapists, students, patients, people pass away expectedly and unexpectedly. They relocate, they abandon each other, schools open, schools close, and somehow there are still people here. And not just here, but there are more people on the way. There are children now who will one day be analysts and patients. As we think about what follows the death of the analyst, do we need to think about what we would like to have in place before we leave them? Renunciation lies at the basis of Totem and Taboo because it's an essential part of the resolution of the Oedipal dilemma. When one becomes a patient or a student, one agrees to follow certain rules. Challenging the frame can be renounced in the interest of differentiation and learning. A certain amount of renunciation is required in order to belong to a tribe or a clan or a group or a class or an institute. That is just enough renunciation so that you can remain in treatment or in classes until your training is complete. Whatever that means. A taboo contains a prohibition, but it also serves the function of belonging. All of the members of the clan share in the sin represented in the sacrificial feast. Observing a taboo is a way of acknowledging membership in the same clan. It's one's ticket to belonging. During, but especially following the loss of the leader, the amount of effort demonstrated in one's renunciation of the wish to, quote, kill dad and marry mom may also represent a level of self-sacrifice which elevates one's status within the group. The greater the renunciation, the higher the status. Of gravest concern for an analyst or a school is how much renunciation is too much. Can a clan member obey the taboos to the extent that they renounce their own ambitions, that they interrupt their own differentiation, that they see only the desire of the other and not their own? How often do we see children who limit their own feelings, ideas, and behaviors? When the Oedipus complex is sufficiently resolved, the son's and the father's instinctual forces are bound to objects in the mind and in the world. They renounce the act of killing each other. In totemism, they are bound by the totem father's promise of protection and love. And they and the clan patient students agree to maintain the taboos. When the father dies, when the institutes, the students and patients are left, they may be confronted with instinctual forces that have suddenly, by virtue of the father's absence, become unbound. They may find alternative ways to bind those drives, but in other cases, patients and students without adequate resources may turn on themselves or each other, or others in their clan, their siblings, for solace, or wonder who was responsible, as I did many years ago. Were the taboos broken? Did we fail to keep our side of the agreement, whether those particular agreements were rational or not? Freud's understanding of the role of renunciation and the pressure to conform, to maintain the taboo, and the unbinding of drive, energy, may help us understand why the taboo against such things as violating the analyst's anonymity are so difficult to broach, and why the idea of creating analytic wills is so challenging. Broaching the analyst's anonymity and acknowledging that analysts die puts us directly in the path of those aggressive and libidinal drives. And then we are always in danger of being torn apart. Freud proposes to us that this conflict, loving the totem and wanting to kill him, obeying the taboos and breaking them, arise naturally from our human nature, whether we like it or not. He says that the Oedipus complex is always active and always in need of being solved because it arises out of our instinctual desires. Every generation has to work it through for themselves. The ambivalence about taboos and totems is why they are violated so often. Usually the fear of punishment for violating a taboo is stronger than the wish, but the wishes and the conflict never leave. They press for expression unendingly, like a spring bubbling in the human unconscious. So now we've arrived back at Jay Leeming's poem. I'll read it and thank you for listening. I'm eager to hear from Dr. Papavasiliou, and then hopefully we can all talk together. The barber. The barber is someone who creates by taking away, like a writer who owns only an eraser. He is like a construction company that begins with a large office building and ends up the small wooden house. On the wall is his license, showing that he's been to school and learned of all of the varieties of loss. For this reason, a haircut can make me nervous. Sometimes I close my eyes and hear only the snip of the scissors. They're two gleaming halves, talking of the balance that is here, the partnership between this man in a blue smock and the hairs, faithful as rain, that even before birth and after death flow tirelessly out of the head toward the comb and the blade. Thank you.
What was he reading? That's his.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. I feel moved by what you've just talked about, by what everybody else has talked about, and I did mean it that I'm here in Image, but I really don't know where I am. I'm emotionally very moved by what has been taking place this morning. And if anything, I feel the reality that I'm an outsider. I'm really just peeking in, hearing people talking about their connection with Jan and how this has come to be and what he has meant to people is just an experience that I didn't participate in from its inception. So it's a different perspective. I really do not have anything to add to your wonderful presentation. I will read some things that I have written down about this topic and also some thoughts. But let's see how it goes. Some of it really feels out of place because people have really spoken about it in a very personal and heartfelt way this morning that I don't think I can match. But here we go. First of all, thank you, I guess, Mr. Larson or Reed, for breathing new life into Freud's Totem and Taboo, a problematic text, as you pointed out, but an important one as well. I also would like to thank Claudia Hellbrunn as well for bringing attention to a very much needed and overlooked topic in psychoanalysis and therapeutic world in general, that of addressing the complexities that follow when an analyst dies. an event that can happen gradually after a period of illness or suddenly with no preparation whatsoever. Before I say a few things that stood out for me from Mr. Larson's presentation, I would like to thank Helene, who along with Jan at the suggestion of Mr. Larson, invited me to be part of CCMPS. Unfortunately, I only had one but lively and fairly long conversation with Jan a few weeks before he died. We were getting to know each other before determining what capacity I could be part of the school. It was the beginning of the pandemic and lockdowns were taking place around the country. So I did not dwell too much of the fact that I had not heard back from him within the time we had agreed. It was Helene a few weeks later who informed me of the very sad news of Jan's death. A very difficult task, no doubt, but also felt very, very heartfelt. Even though I had talked with Jan only once, and it was what meant to be the beginning of a collaboration, it took me some time for the news to sink in and to start to process what that meant for me and, I guess, the school. It was clear from my conversation with Jan that teaching and promoting psychoanalysis were some of the most important aspects of his life. At that point, I had no idea about the cooking and the music, which are actually passions of mine as well. In that sense, I wonder how the school, the CCM's community could absorb such a loss. It's a nice coincidence that Mr. Larson started his talk by reading The Barber, a poem by J. Leeming. When I started thinking about this topic, my first reaction was that instead of arriving at death by adding the days of a lived life, it is instead the process of subtracting from the point of death to reveal the lived life. In other words, it is through getting in touch with loss that we can take a glimpse at life. This can take place on a grand scale of the totality of one's life, or how in every session we conduct, there is a countdown from 50 minutes to 0. It is because we know that there is an end that we can focus on discovering what is alive. Loss, though, and death as the biggest possible loss are incomprehensible to our minds. Freud tackles this topic around the same period he wrote Totem and Taboo in his short but very influential work, Mourning and Melancholia. Before I comment on a few points that Freud made and Mr. Larson's creative reading of Totem and Taboo, I want to point out that biologically, it is very hard to comprehend death. In an article written by neuroscientist David J. Linden titled, "A Neuroscientist Prepares for Death," written after he was diagnosed unexpectedly with terminal cancer without experiencing any symptoms, he points out the predictive nature of our brains. We continuously look forward into the future and try to predict what will happen and how we can respond to it. In other words, even death is something to look beyond it from our brain point of view. He postulates that beliefs about afterlife and reincarnation are rooted in that inability to grasp an end. Yet an end does come. It is trying to comprehend that end that can deliver a painful blow to our narcissism. Mr. Larson, in his summary of Totem and Taboo, did a beautiful job bypassing the problematic aspects of the text and focusing on the emotional ambivalence that characterizes the relationship between the tribe members and the totem, or the leader, or the analyst. It is in that ambivalence that our task lies in how we process loss. Often in psychoanalytic settings, There is almost what it feels a conspiracy of silence that envelops the illness or death of an analyst. I recall a patient of mine who had to take matters in her own hands and track down her ill analyst who was in a coma at a hospital so she could visit him before he died. The Institute was unable to facilitate such process. Stories of this kind abound, as one can read in the book, What Happens When the Analyst Dies. I would like to say a few things about mourning and melancholia. That in both cases, in mourning and melancholia, there is a withdrawal. The person is remembered while knowing that they are gone. That is in mourning. We know that we'll never meet this person again. In melancholia, there is also an energy that is withdrawn within us, but we relate to the person as if they're still alive, if they're still here, if they will still appear, if we will see them in the next session or in the Institute. It's also important to note that in the process of mourning, it's not only a singular event. It's something that is an accumulation of all the losses, big and small, that have taken in our lives, that get reactivated. And in the positive sense, it's a way of helping us build the capacity to process loss. However, if we get stuck in that, if we cannot let go of the person that has been lost, if we need desperately to keep that in our mind as if they're still alive, there is a much more painful process of how to move through this. In mourning, as I said, one feels the emptiness of that person, but they also feel free to reinvest that libidinal energy in someone else. In melancholia, reinvesting our energy is impeded by the inability to acknowledge that the person or an ideal is truly gone. Sometimes that is because there is conflict about who that person was, what that meant to us, whether we had conflicted feelings towards that person that we could never really acknowledge or could never really own. Handling ambivalence in the analytic process. Few additional thoughts that in a rejection, as with the death of the analyst or even forced termination by the analyst, the patient can feel devalued. They feel there is a loss of agency and also a loss of the possibility of caring for another person, for the analyst. And libidinal connection is severed. Sudden withdrawal of libidinal investment, if fleeting and narcissistic injury, can bring us back to an undifferentiated pre-self state. Attempts can be made to keep the object alive in fantasy, in rituals, to maintain a psychic proximity, a connection. As Freud also points out in Mourning and Melancholia, it can propel a manic flea to secure a replacement, seek to find a better, more exciting object, in an attempt to erase or bypass the significance of the person lost, of the pain that we feel. One task that remains is sometimes the management of free-floating energy, possibly rage that the loss has brought. I love Linda's word of quilting and feeling unquilted. also Mr. Larson points out in terms of binding, the frame providing a binding the emotional connection, and by keeping the frame of creating safety, both for the analyst and the patient. And when that is gone, this energy can go in any direction. The rage that or anger that can be freed can also be directed as a punishment to oneself, can be directed to oneself for the unfathomable injustice that has taken place. There can be also room for gratitude. Or maybe gratitude has to wait until the feelings of anger can be fanned off, until enough psychic distance grows for the positive aspects to emerge. And the unconscious guilt, as Mr. Larson was talking about did the analyst die or did we kill him? Have to be processed. So also just to underscore about the importance of renunciation, of always examining what it is that we have to give up in order to maintain a relationship. So I will stop here. And I would like to hear the questions and thoughts that people might have. Thank you.
I would like to say something very quickly to Dr. Papavasiou. You mentioned being an outsider, and while that might be true for now, I don't think so for very long. For anyone that does not know you yet, that has been a part of this school for any length of time, I can say that having gotten to know you a little bit over the past year and how you work, that you will fit in here better than you realize, or maybe are realizing. I think Dr. Papavasiou very much represents what Jan saw for the school and how he viewed psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. And I am very much looking forward to you becoming a part of the tribe.
Thank you. Thank you. Very, very kind words. I appreciate that.
I would like to say that one thing about loss is the incompletion of the task at hand when the loss occurred. So if one uses the analogy of getting the haircut, your barber suddenly disappeared, you're sitting in the chair with a half-completed haircut, and what the hell are you supposed to do? And the only thing you can do is get up from the chair and leave. And one of the large parts of any loss is the incompletion of what was started and will not be finished.
That's a very good way of putting it. And I wonder, that's when we are confronted with what choices we have. Do we live our lives with a half-done haircut? Do we find another person to continue and finish that haircut? Or do we give the haircut as bad as may be ourselves? Those are the choices that we're confronted with, and those can be very painful choices. But yeah, I think you put it very well, Bill. And just to think about barbers, it's so impossible to find a good barber. Sometimes they go away.
And when
then
you
here we are, we have to find another one. It's almost as difficult as finding an analyst, I think. It's a particular intimate endeavor, that one event that takes place. How often do we have somebody so close to us that really a stranger in our head, handling our head?
That choice of pasted together strategies as to how to go on being, whether it's continue with a half done haircut, sit watching in the mirror what you look like with a half done haircut, various other prospects, just let it grow out, whatever. It reminds me, we're talking about ambivalence, and it reminds me of the kind of polarities at work in some of the ways of grieving that we've talked about today. There's this sense of an introject, an internal object that Jan is for some of us anyway, and then that other sense of a devastating loss and maybe objectless, internal objectlessness. And how can those two things be true at the same time, and how can we reconcile that in terms of the choices of the directions of mourning or the directions of melancholy? I mean, it's almost like the logical conclusion of the melancholy that you're describing is to just commune with the internal object and decathect from the outside world, and then the other possibility of recathecting, but doing it with a different object. And what combination of those do we work out?
I'd like to remind us of something that often comes up when I'm talking to other patients when death or loss is imminent or has just happened, and that is anger at the dead. There has to be a part of us that is angry with Jan for abandoning us. Who does he think he is, leaving us like this? And I think it's important that we say we can let, having said that there has to be anger, that we can then consider letting it go without letting the love go. We can retain our deep affection for the memory and try to work through his abandoning us.
David, I respectfully
go ahead, Adam.
I respectfully disagree with that, and I am open to the idea that I'm just not there yet. That that there's something blocking that I might get to later. I'm open to that idea, but I haven't yet in these past 2 years experienced any anger directed at him for abandoning me. I experience a lot of anger, for sure. Some of it very old, and some of it at the situations that it caused. But I really cannot connect with that. I've heard that so many times over the past couple of years, this supposed lingering anger at the person that abandoned us. And it feels very alien to me, at least in this point. I don't know if everyone experiences that so universally. I'll leave it at that.
I agree with you, Adam. It wasn't that level of ambivalence wasn't really present with Jan. That level of hate wasn't really part of it. And I don't think that's, like you said, I don't think that's a pathological, denying away some sort of anger or anything like that. I agree with you.
I think the understanding this is helped by making a distinction between the rational mind and the irrational mind. On the irrational mind level, this person you cared about is gone. It's not like, well, he didn't ask to die because he didn't. He's gone. You're not going to have him anymore. And there's just kind of a gut reaction or irrational mind reaction to that, I think. And then you go to think about it and you go, well, I can't be mad at him because he didn't want to die and it wasn't his fault and this and that. And then a lot of people will turn their anger inward and they'll blame themselves and try to explain that it was their fault that he died and this and that. And I just think it's trying to come to grips with what happens and how do we tolerate, how do we keep going, how do we live through it, how do we explain it? Because we have a need to understand the universe and what happens to us and how it happens and all of that kind of stuff. So I don't think it's anything that is negative. I just think it's human in a way to deep down have angry thoughts because here's this person, he's not in my life anymore. I don't ever get to see him again. And so I think it's there, but most people, when you go to think about it, you take the feeling away.
And Jan was for me such an arbiter of that understanding of the universe. That's there's a little distillation of or projection of where my anger goes around this. The last interaction I had with Jan was in a class, and I had developed an understanding, or what I thought was an understanding, of a particular clinical issue, and it was in part an understanding developed from kind of this experience of thinking together in supervisions. And it became one of the relative sureties in my clinical practice. They're pretty rare, so I don't like having to relinquish them. And in that last class, Jan said something towards the end of the class, at the end of the class, that made it clear that he no longer sees it this way. this clinical conceptualization, and this was the first I'd heard of that. And I was like, but wait, tell me how you got from, what I thought I understood with you to where you're at now, because this is of clinical relevance. And that was the last. He said, we'll talk about it next time.
Well, I think the anger is anger, fury that we don't have what we want. And it may not be directed at the person who died, but you experience that anger.
That makes sense, Phyllis.
Yeah.
So what's missing if you don't? What do you think is missing? I don't experience the anger towards Jan either.
You're not angry that happened?
I mean, yeah, I'm angry that death happens and angry that happened and angry that every other death that happened in the last 2 years happened, but not at him. I'm not angry at him.
Right.
Is that, that seems like if people experience the anger at the analyst, that's a kind of a transference, and not everybody's going to have that particular transference. I don't know.
Thank you, Beth.
Hi, everyone. I'm Claudia. I'm definitely an outsider here, but so just want to say it's so wonderful that you're all doing this, and I know it must be so incredibly hard. Through everything I did, what I realized is that every person's reaction is incredibly idiosyncratic, even though there are themes. Anger can be directed at all sorts of things or not happen at all, depending on the relationship someone has with the person who's gone. I really found Reid and what you said to be so true, and what's so challenging, I think, is that the frame that gives everybody the safety has to be broken in order for a patient to be taken care of at the end of an analyst's life, or if an analyst is sick. There's no way to keep it, really, because patients know. So it's already gone, even when an analyst is denying it, that it's gone. But, more than anything, I wanted to say that I'm just so glad this kind of conference is taking place, because it's so essential and it's so rare. And I am so sorry for all of your losses. I know how hard it is.
Thank you, Claudia, for pointing that out. And I highly recommend the book that you edited and you wrote. It's an excellent book because it points out exactly to this idiosyncratic response to death, and also its process of loss, whether sudden or not, is unique, and the reaction to it is also unique. And it's very good to read stories where it takes years for some people to come to a different understanding of their relationship with their analyst, and also their experience and their understanding of themselves and how that has played out. It's not anything that happens overnight or within a year or within something. It's not that different than how I should say, continue to review, revise, and re-understand my relationship with my significant others in my life. It's not that it happens once and there is the outcome and it's over. And on that, somehow Andrew Green comes to mind now, when he mentioned it's the third analysis that you really get it right. So that's another perspective of when we arrive at something, at least Andrew Green's perspective.
Great. I only have one more to go.
Unless you're like me and all three die.
Oh, no.
Oh, God.
Mine have all died.
Oh, God.
Mine have all died.
Well, I really do wonder about this this question of analytic making plans. When we're gone, we won't get a say. And do we want to? So much of in my study on of these patients who decided to stay and those who decided to leave my practice when I moved. I see how I should have handled it differently, depending upon which one I should have handled. I've handled it the same with everybody, and now I could plan out maybe a different approach should that I ever be in that position again. But once I'm gone, I don't get to say how the patients are. My patients are notified. It has to be whoever gets the job of doing it, they get to decide. I think at IPTAR there's an ongoing, people have been using some analytic wills, and there's ongoing updating of them. And I don't know why it's so hard. I mean, my sister and I are still talking about our healthcare plans. And how we want our children to be cared for, should something happen unexpectedly. It's very important. I think it's a very important question, and I don't know why it's so difficult.
Do analytic wills ever include having letters to patients that are released in the case of death? Is that something that people do? And are there any thoughts about that here?
I am an outsider, but I would say that the thought of that paralyzes me to just try to write an analytic goodbye to all of my clients at this point. It would be phenomenal, a task, it seems to me. you know?
I think it depends. I mean, I think there's a difference between creating an analytic will when you're healthy and well, just to make sure your patients are notified and taken care of and given referrals if they need it, which I think is
right,
all of our responsibilities. I think that's essential. It should be required.
Agreed.
And then, you know, if someone is sick and knows they're going to die and they choose to write, you know, because it feels right to that analyst, then I would imagine it's fine. It's like everything else. It's about a relationship that exists. And, you know, I couldn't do it now, I'm fine. But, you know, maybe if I wasn't, I could, I don't know.
I understand that what you're saying, that if you really want to do that, if you really have
yeah, it can't be required. I think only the thing that should be required is that patients get told, because even that's not required now, you know.
I started working with Jan analytically about the time I had bypass surgery, and I had to, it necessitated me writing a letter to just be posted on the door of my status. I didn't give too much information, but I was having to face the possibility of my death and how I was going to take care of my patients. And it was interesting to be talking to Jan about it, because I just started working with him. I think I even had a session over the phone with him while I was in the hospital. And then I worked with him for the next 10 years, and then he passes. And I only got to see him when we had the conference a couple of years ago on neurodivergency. You know, I'd talk on the phone, I'd seen a picture of him, but I'd never met him in person. And then I finally got to, and it was nice to just be having dinner with him and just be with him. I've been with him on the phone for years, but to actually see him, to see Helene, to see some of the others for the first time was quite something. And then poof, he's gone.
So we're at lunchtime or break time. So we'll be on lunch for about 45 minutes. And we'll see you back here. If you, we're going to leave the Zoom link up, and we've got a couple of presentations. We've got 4 different presentations, and then hopefully we can spend an hour together thinking about the ethics of analytic wills and what the analyst is responsible for, what the patient might like, and etc. We'll see where it goes, but. So thank you very much, and we'll see you in an hour, 45 minutes.